All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today to my talk, How to Become Obsolete. This might be a little bit of a break from the intense C++ you've been listening to so far at the conference, because there'll be no code in today's talk. We're going to listen to a little bit of avant-garde music and mostly story time. So how to become obsolete. Is AI what this talk is about? No, this is actually about human stuff. But I know a few people thought that maybe this talk was about this, and actually I realized seeing other conference talks and how much at CBPCon this is being discussed, people might think this is about AI. So a little aside, I'm also at Native Instruments working on AI developer tool evangelism and adoption. So if you've not checked out these tools, I highly recommend it because they could give you superpowers, and maybe in the future you'll be obsolete if you don't check it out. But that's not the story for today. So I'm Roth Michaels. I'm a principal software engineer at Native Instruments. I'll tell you a little bit more about Native Instruments in a moment, but first, a little bit more about my background. Before I got into software development in high school and maybe even younger, I was a musician and composer, led a variety of bands playing jazz and other kind of music over the years. And I also did a little bit of programming. Read a book on C at some point, took a class on Java through the local university when I was in high school. This was Java 2, so it was actually very much a anti-C++ propaganda class, which was interesting, story for another day. And also did a lot of web development in the browser war days, which turned me off of that for quite a bit. Got to work for a cool web startup. Also, if you want to hear about that, some hallway conversation. Thinking about going to university, I thought about going to music school, but decided I want to go to university to study something else, even though I was interested in music. I thought, oh, maybe I'll study physics. But while I was doing that, I realized, well, I'm not going to go do an advanced degree in physics, so maybe that's not how I want to spend my university time. So I bounced around a little bit, ended up minoring in English, almost was a studio art major doing painting and drawing, but ultimately when I had to choose a major, I realized, no, I was a music major in denial, so I joined the music department. My advisor actually referred to me as double majoring in music for taking more classes than I had to for that, and studying music composition. And so, I play vibraphone and piano as my main instruments. My vibraphone teacher also taught me Latin hand percussion. And I got into software development kind of for real, other than those little bits from my pre-university days, actually working on my own music. So this picture in the middle is from this piece of software called Pure Data. It's related to another piece of data flow and event handling music software called Max. And over the summer, after my first year in university, a friend of mine in a band showed me some stuff he was learning when he was at Syracuse. I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. I kind of programmed my own effects, and so I started making my own little effects on my computer that I'd run with my Fender Rhodes during bands. And then when I started studying music composition in university, I was not doing some jazz composition, other kind of acoustic music composition, as well as studying electronic music composition. And so one of the really cool things I got access to in our electronic music studio is this Buchla modular synthesizer that you see in the upper right. Actually, that's pre the name Buchla as a company. It says San Francisco Tape Studio on all the modules, so this is a super vintage thing. If you've heard rumors about this Buchla and maybe licking it, it's true, but that I'm way too young, and it was licked clean by the time I got here. And then also, I was using some digital software, like this picture on the bottom right is this program Tasman that's a virtual version of a modular synthesizer. It also does some physical modeling and other stuff. But as I was using that, I realized, well, these knobs only go so far. But it's just math happening here, and they're just numbers. I should be able to make these knobs do whatever I want. And so I started using Pure Data and Max, and then writing my own extensions for these environments to write software for my own music is how I first got into writing software. And when I left university, I was trying to make a career around writing software for composers and other artists for their multimedia needs, which was really fun, but it was really hard to pay my rent, getting my piece of somebody else's stipend for their commission. So eventually I pivoted to doing mobile app development and consulting, because I got into iOS development the first day possible with the SDK, because I was really excited about multi-touch as a control surface for music. So we can chat about that in the hallway as well if you're interested. And then, during my consulting time, I eventually ended up inspired to try to do my own startup. It was a very short mission. We made some cool stuff, but we didn't have a business model. So once my seed money and my own bank account were empty and I couldn't hire developers anymore, I was like, oh, maybe I need a break from this freelancing and startup stuff. I should maybe look at a normal job. And I updated my LinkedIn and was lucky enough that day to get a message from a recruiter at Isotope, which is a company that makes software for both post-production for film and television and software for mixing and mastering records. And I was actually a user of their software many years before this, so I thought, oh, that's going to be a really cool, exciting opportunity. And then later, 4 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, Isotope merged with another audio software company based here in Berlin called Native Instruments, and then also we ended up joining with Plugin Alliance and Brainworks to make this big family of audio tech companies. And so now I'm working on cross-engineering topics with these three legacy code bases, and I was also a user of Native Instruments software as well, so it's really fun to get to work on all this stuff. So what inspired this talk? Last year at Meeting C++, I saw 2 talks that made me think about the fact that so far I've only talked about programming topics at conferences. And so one talk, and I recommend, if you've not seen these, they're both really great, and I really recommend them. They were inspiring to me. One from Titus Winters called Fear in Tech, and another, actually I'll leave this up for a second in case anyone's getting that QR code. And another one from Kate Gregory called The Aging Programmer. And so I thought, maybe I'd really love to give a talk about the human side of programming, because I am talking all the time with folks about the fact that, yeah, I love digging into the nerdy aspects of C++ and thinking about templates and concepts and all these cool things. But really the interesting thing to me is the human side of programming, because that's I think the real challenging and complex part of engineering is working with teams and humans, because they're even weirder than C++. Also, over the years, I've worked first at Isotope and Native Instruments. It'll be 9 years of this journey of these companies with me in January. And I've seen various colleagues come and go. So I had a close collaborator at Isotope that I'd worked with for a number of years. And when he did his offboarding, there's a lot of knowledge that may be left with him. But luckily, I was still around, and we worked together closely, so we didn't lose too much knowledge. But I thought, oh, well, how am I going to deal with my offboarding and sharing my knowledge when it comes time? And I realized, and then also, when another colleague of mine from GTM was talking about her offboarding, she actually wanted to stay an extra 3 weeks instead of 2 because she had so much stuff to share. And I thought, man, how can I share 9 years of knowledge and historical lore at these companies in only 3 weeks? So I started thinking, about, sometime last year or earlier this year about how can I make sure that there really is no offboarding when I decide to do my next thing, that I've left my teams that I really care about personally and all these people in good shape, that they don't need me anymore, and also the software I care about will also be in good hands when I leave. And then also, more recently, I have a new role. I'm no longer sitting on any particular product team, but I'm reporting to our chief technology and product officer and working on cross-engineering topics across all these 3 companies. And I was advised, Roth, you got to really work hard on not doing as much tactical stuff anymore, because I need you to work on this big picture strategy stuff. But people are still coming to me with questions all the time. And so that made me realize, okay, my human topic is, because I need to think about this myself, how do I make myself obsolete at this company so people don't need me anymore? Before we get into this, I want to share a little story from CPPCon in September. So a number of years ago, I gave this talk about some work we did on a UI library at Isotope, and it was about template metaprogramming stuff. And on YouTube, someone left a question, oh, why didn't you show concepts? And it was because they were new, and we couldn't use them yet with Apple's Xcode. But earlier this year, I was like, well, let me do a new version, and now we can talk about how this stuff is much nicer and easier to understand with concepts. But after I gave the talk, I was really not happy about it, because I realized during it that I updated my slides, I had my old slide deck, I made all the examples again with concepts, but I realized while I was giving it, I'm redoing my first conference talk with the same structure, and I'm better at this now. And mid-talk, I realized, oh, wait, I'm now remembering all the things I could have done better this first time. I'm now making the same mistakes again, but just showing concepts. And yeah, people enjoyed it in the room, but I didn't feel good about it afterwards. So later that evening at the hotel bar, I'm talking with another friend and colleague I've known for a number of years from C++ conferences, and he's asking me about how my talk went, and I shared this with him, that I, am kind of bummed out that it wasn't my best. I could have done better, and, the story I just told you about kind of just redoing the same structure from my novice first conference talk. And he told me that, Roth, I am so glad you shared this with me, because he said that as himself, he's not super confident as a speaker, especially with English, not as his first language. And he sees me as a very confident, talented speaker. To hear me, being so vulnerable, saying, "Oh, I'm really unhappy about what I did," it made him feel a lot better about, oh, everyone maybe feels this way. And this wasn't actually playing part of the agenda, but I was talking with someone yesterday that was a new speaker here, asking me about confidence and giving talks. And I told him that every talk I've ever given, while I'm preparing and getting ready to go, I'm thinking, man, is this content good? Will people like this? But once I'm actually on stage as a performer, ready to give this presentation to you, I get much more confidence. I just want to let you all know I went through the same journey the past few weeks of thinking that, man, I don't know if this will be very good, but now I'm actually really excited to share all these stories with you today. And I also want to thank all of my colleagues at our Berlin office over the past 2 weeks that I've been here in Berlin talking with them, because they were really curious to hear about this talk, and they gave me a lot of really interesting feedback and ideas that helped evolve it over the last few weeks. And speaking about this, I'm always telling people to be in my talks, people up here, we're not some magical C++ folks. We're just regular developers like you, and everyone has something to share. So I also encourage everyone to consider giving a talk and sharing something if you have not before. So back to the topic at hand. A few themes that we're going to talk about today, and vulnerability is one of them, which is why I wanted to share that story at the beginning. But a lot of this we're talking, I think a big key to this becoming obsolete is leading by example, being vulnerable, being open. I actually got a few compliments from colleagues recently telling me that they feel I've been much more approachable than other engineering leaders they work with, because I'm just show up as Roth, not just some senior engineering guy. And candor is also really important, and part of that also is bragging about failure. And then one-on-one mentorship is something else we'll talk about a little bit. So why become obsolete? There's a lot of jokes sometimes in the software industry about doing this or that to maintain job security. If you write some complex templates, that no one will understand this and they'll need you forever. But that's really not the position you want to be in, because, well, if this one team needs you forever, then maybe you don't ever get to go move on to another role and do something else because you've pigeonholed yourself into this one position. And then also, like I said, the goal isn't having security today in this one thing you're doing, but you should either be able to move on to new roles at your company and have your old teams function fine without you, or be able to leave and move on and do something else cool and new and interesting, and leave things in good shape behind you. So I want to start off with talking about my free jazz philosophy on leading teams, because I started off, as I said, as a band leader and then a private consultant, so I really wasn't leading engineering teams until I joined iZotope. I was teaching engineering topics to folks, and sometimes consulting, teaching Swift to some people, but I was never the one leading the teams. So I want to play a couple examples of some music of mine, very ancient stuff, because hallway conversation reasons why my more recent music isn't on the internet. But in this first piece of, and also I'm not going to play the whole thing for you because these are long, kind of 10-minute things, but in this first piece of music, I want you to notice on the music stands, there's these giant pieces of paper on there. There's this kind of partially Western notation, partly graphic score, but the point is, while this is improvised, there's also kind of specific things that are going on here. And yes, I promise it is me on the left, but 17 years ago, I had more hair on the top of my head and less on my face. And this one as well, you can't see the musicians in the dark, but what's playing on the video is actually the score for this piece of music. There's kind of an algorithm that determines with some randomness what blends and clips and colors show up, but there's specific instructions for the performers when you see this video, this color, etc. Do this thing. And so both of these pieces of music I just played for you, there's a structure, there's a composition in mind. They have names. The first one was called Vincible. This one is called 5 Fun 2. And actually, you notice it says part 1, because fun fact, this was so long ago, YouTube wouldn't let you put more than 10 minutes online at a time. So this 17-minute composition had to be broken in 2 parts. But while there's a structure and to these pieces, they're also highly improvised. And the exact notes and things that people are playing are not always notated. But then later, there's another group I formed called Punkte, and you'll notice this is the main formation as a duo. We sometimes had other guest artists, but you'll notice there's no music in front of us here. The music you'll listen to and this picture are different performances, but the same group, also no music in the recording you'll hear. But you will listen to a composition that has a name. It's called Substantive Take is the one we're going to listen to. And the idea is that, and I've actually been asked this question a lot, like, what does it mean to be a free jazz composer? People think, oh, you're just, improvising, making stuff up. But there's actually usually a composition that the composer has in mind. And so I'll play this for you, and then I'll kind of give the reveal about why we're showing these examples. So you might notice that with the piece of music in front of the performers or not, it's still pretty avant-garde, a lot of weird stuff going on. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when I started moving away from my kind of work with live electronics and instrumental bands, from having a graphic score or some other like clearly defined structure and rehearsing the performers saying, yeah, I want this, I want this, I want this, with this kind of more freely improvised structure, I was struggling with, okay, I have a composition in mind. This piece, substantive take, there's actually specific things I want. But if I tell the other improviser, oh, no, you're doing it wrong. Play it like this. I'm going to be inhibiting their creativity, and I'm not going to be getting what they want out of them. And this was, I didn't really know what to do about this, because people weren't playing it how I wanted them to play it, but I also didn't want to tell them they were doing it wrong. Sorry, my clicker got a little messed up with the audio. There we go. Luckily, since I was a young kid, I was very kind of coincidentally lucky that my piano teacher was formerly a free jazz musician in New York, and that was like a big part of her career, working with her own bands and recording jazz records. And so I went to her and I said, hey, and her name's Marianne Driscoll. I went to her someday and I asked her, hey, Marianne, what do I do about this? And I posed this problem of wanting specific things, but not wanting to tell people they're doing it wrong to inhibit their creativity. And we won't get into all the techniques she talked to me about, but basically the idea was she told me, well, don't tell them with your words, but show them with what you're playing what you want them to play. And so either just musically what you do that they'll respond to in a certain way, or maybe you don't always play the exact piece of music you're working on, but you have some other etude or rehearsal technique you'll use that helps them get into the mood they want. But really this comes down to leading by example and kind of showing people what you want and not telling them what you want. And so this experience, a lot of other experiences leading bands, was something I was thinking about a lot when I got into leading software teams. And it didn't all work as planned at first. I thought, oh yeah, no problem. I know how to lead people. I've led bands. And leading teams of the software was a little bit different. So to talk about my leadership journey from iZotope and Native Instruments, we'll talk a little bit more about what inspired me to start thinking about this topic of becoming obsolete, and how I started working, developing other leaders and teams at these companies. So as I said, I joined iZotope, and I was originally working for the first project on this software RX on the left, which is for our post-production audio stuff. And then the first projects I worked on end-to-end was this mastering software at the left, Ozone, and then after this vocal product, Nectar. And my role on these teams was senior engineer or tech lead coach, because I was a new hire as a senior engineer, more experienced than the person that was leading these teams career-wise, but he was an old school iZotope person that knew Ozone from back in the day, so he was deep into these products, so that's why he was the tech lead. But my manager asked me to support him in this role and kind of coach him and teach him and mentor him on being a tech leader. And we'll get back to a little bit about actually how we did that in a second. The other thing I started working on was being the lead of a project to develop this new UI framework within our company. It's called Glass, and these are our mascots, our little glass hippos. And then there was a project that I was tech lead on, the next version of this mastering software, Ozone. And my colleague, who was tech lead on the previous projects, didn't just become a team member. We actually still consider ourselves co-tech leads. The real main difference that happened is there are certain meetings with managers and PMs that he had to go to before, and now I'm the one going to those meetings. But when we're actually working with the team, it was the two of us as leaders together. And so sharing leadership, I think, is another kind of big key piece of this. It's not doing it all on your own. And again, that's a theme that will come up in a little bit. Then I was tech lead working on these two products at the same time, NeoVerb and some updates to this product, tonal balance control. And we had some new hires, and my team grew big enough that we could actually work on two projects at once. And doing that, we actually had leads for each of these projects. And I kind of started becoming the meta tech lead and coaching these other developers how to be tech leads, having one-on-ones, et cetera. And the next thing I worked on was being the lead of our first attempt to launch a subscription product instead of selling our products perpetually. That's not too many details we need to go with, but the reason I bring this up is this is actually the first time I started thinking about this concept of needing to become obsolete, because also around this era, something that happened is when I first joined, the teams essentially proposed projects directly to the executives, And then once things were approved, we're kind of off running on their own, working with the engineering manager, PM, and tech lead, and just doing the project. But as the company grew, our executive team had to work on more strategic stuff, and we started establishing leadership teams, like cross-functional group of engineering manager, design manager, product manager, et cetera. And that was a little bit bumpy for me because I wasn't used to this kind of new layer above me, et cetera. But also at some point I was talking with our CTO about feedback, kind of some other things I needed career-wise. I told him, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing right now because the product team working the subscription stuff, my co-tech lead before, like he's got this show covered. Like I don't think the team really needs me anymore. But also when I'm asking this leadership team that's working with us to support them, that's for managers. They don't really need me either. So I feel like the leadership team doesn't need me. The team doesn't need me. I'm kind of stuck in this middle spot. Like it doesn't feel good. Like what's the point of my job right now? I was really bummed out. But my CTO told me at the time, Roth, that means you did a good job. This is what's supposed to happen. So when this happens and your team doesn't need you anymore, you have this great opportunity to take a breath and think, look up and think, okay, what's the new thing that needs to be done and new thing I can go do because these people don't need me anymore. So that's the first time I started thinking about this becoming obsolete, and I think that's one of the main motivations why I think everyone should think about this goal of becoming obsolete. And then we merged with Native Instruments, and I started, as I said at the time, becoming this wandering samurai and essentially bouncing around from team to team, sharing technologies, helping out with this project or this project. And my teams in Boston and Isotope thought like, oh, we're missing Roth, et cetera. So that's another reason I started thinking about, well, yeah, you guys don't need me anymore, but how can I support you in the meantime? So going back to this shared tech leadership thing, a big part of this is pairing, and pairing is going to be a theme that shows up with this. Now, I'm someone that believes a lot in kind of the traditional pair programming, but that's not so much always what we're talking about today, because as a leader, you'll often might find yourself navigating more than driving in pair programming, but that's okay, as long as you do it in the right way and you actually use that opportunity to teach people. So like I said, working with my colleague as kind of co-tech leads or coaching him, we were both, I'd kind of help him with, kind of some of the leadership stuff, planning, just kind of thinking about architecture choices, et cetera. But then also when we were actually working on projects, we were pairing together at each other's computers a lot. Usually one of us doing the typing because we both had weird keyboard setups and it was too hard to use someone else's computer. But we were talking every day, collaborating, and wrote a lot of code and solved problems together. And it was a really great experience. I think that is both what helped build him up as a leader, as well as what kind of made us interchangeable in shared leadership. Like one of us can go on vacation and the other one's taking over the team. Also, leading this UI project, there was never a stable team working on developing this new library. Essentially, there was a free developer that might work with me for a couple weeks or a month, and then someone else. So they're coming in this project kind of new, and so the only way they could really get up, to use their time well is we would pair on everything together. Either maybe me writing tests, and they would write something, or again, us working together, solving problems, figuring out where we had to put the template keyword to make this template still work, et cetera. So collaboration and pairing, I think, is a big part of how you, build up other leaders on your team. And also, onboarding is a whole big topic, but I want to mention this since part of the inspiration was offboarding. The mentorship starts on the onboarding experience, and I find it's very useful, designing new tasks for developers, not to just send them off on their own, but to work with them and show them, like, okay, for this task, here's the part of the code base you want to explore, and kind of design these tasks for them to check out different parts of this. Not going to talk too much about onboarding, but I just thought that was worth mentioning. And it's not just pairing. Another part of it is one-on-ones with these tech leads. So when I was working with these two teams, I would meet once a week with the tech leads to talk with them about anything they wanted to talk about, whether that's, oh, here's some struggle I'm having with the product manager, and they don't get this concern. How would you think I should approach this? Or, hey, what do you think about this architecture decision? So those conversations are really useful to have everything and be free to answer any of those questions. But also, I would also share my struggles and concerns with them and to show them what I was dealing with at the time as well. Again, as far as being vulnerable and open with people. But don't stop there. It's not just with the tech leads. I also started scheduling maybe less regular, but one-on-ones with other members of the team as well, maybe subject matter experts on this or this, to find other opportunities to mentor folks. And I was actually honored and surprised that I had a colleague recently apparently referred to one of our meetings as, oh, I'm meeting with my mentor Roth, and I never even thought about myself that way. It was more just, oh, there's a developer that I want help with on stuff. I want to nurture their role, and so we're going to talk every chance I'm in Berlin. Especially in our remote and distributed world we might have these days, actually joining with people on calls and talking, I think, is really important. And a big part of this is identifying leaders or potential new leaders, and finding where they are within your team. So there's some people that might be obvious tech leads that you can tell they talk a lot in meetings, they have a lot of strong technical opinions, and they're the ones you kind of see when there's a new team lead necessary. Oh yeah, this is the one the manager is going to point at to this. But there's also non-obvious and reluctant leaders as well. I've had a colleague that when I was first working with them, they would often tell me that, no, I don't want to be a leader. I just want to work on my thing, do my thing. But I could tell a lot of the projects they're working on would go a lot better if they had a team to work with them on this. And so I would slowly encourage them over the years, hey, don't work on this alone. Maybe find someone else to work on this with you. And now this person I'm speaking of is actually leading a group of people on some effort, and actually is the one that I connect with often to check in on what's going on with the Isotope and Boston team. So I kind of view them as getting to run the show for me, even though they're not running it. They're the experienced staff engineer that's kind of influencing everyone. But I think if you asked them 6 years ago if they imagined themselves as a leader, they would not have saw themselves that way. Also, there's another kind of leader, which is a subject matter expert. There might be the person that wrote this new component, or is really one of the only people left that has worked with this part of the legacy code. And so knowing who the subject matter experts are is really important. So when someone comes to you with a question, even though I might know, I can tell you, oh yeah, go talk to Andrew, or go talk to Eric. They're the ones that's really the expert on this, and they might have the answer. And then if they're stuck, they might come back to me. And as I said before, you should really always be looking for opportunities to share leadership and not do it on your own. Like I said, both because that builds other people up, and we only have so much time in the day. So as senior technical leaders, we have a lot of stuff to do. If we try to do everything on our own, we don't have that many calories or hours in the day. So one more musical example.
Roth Michaels on the vibraphone, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, kind of a joke. That's not, you really don't get to hear that example for copyright reasons, because it's a Frank Zappa cover band. The other stuff was my music, so I couldn't actually play this for you. But kind of funny coincidence, when I messaged my friend who started this band, and we played in other ones, hey, do you have any videos of this Zappa cover band? And I was hoping he had Son of a Susie Cream Cheese, which is the favorite song we played. But it was a funny coincidence, the one thing on YouTube that they call me out at the end of this. But why I bring this up is initially the other 3 guys in this band had started the Zappa cover band, and they had heard that there was this guy, like this high school student, or I actually had just graduated, who played vibraphone. And vibraphone or other mallet percussion is a big part of Zappa's music. Actually, where we're playing this gig is this bistro, and that was at times also kind of a coffee shop that me and my friends would hang out and drink coffee and play chess there in the afternoons. And so they heard, hey, there's this guy Roth that hangs out at Francine and plays vibraphone. Like, you should go find him and recruit this for your band. They did find me there, and I said, yeah, sure. I'll always like playing new music. Why not? But as I joined the band, it might have been my different experiences with other bands, leading bands. I found myself sometimes leading the rehearsal. And I felt kind of uncomfortable about that, because previously when I led rehearsals, it was my band. But all of a sudden, this is someone else's band. They asked me to join. Maybe they're a little bit older than me. That's maybe not so much of a concern, because I played with people much older than me before. But I was concerned, like, is this okay that I'm leading the rehearsals, even though it's not my band? So again, I talked to my mentor and piano teacher, Marianne. I told her this dilemma, and she said, Roth, look, you're a leader, and people can tell, and they're looking to you for this, so just get over it. This is going to keep happening to you. Just, you need to be okay with it. And so like I said, in this band, I felt like the reluctant leader, and there are other people that might feel like, oh yeah, no, I don't want to be a leader. I want to do my thing, but they might have this certain philosophy that you need or something else. So I encourage you to nurture those people, but not make them be a leader or a manager, but finding the reluctant leaders and not just the loud voices is a really important thing. And also, to make a point about shared leadership, one of the initiatives I started recently at Native Instruments is something I call the Technology Strategy Forum that is working on cross-engineering topics with our 3 brands. And normally, some companies might call this the architecture team, but I felt that sounds like a bit ivory tower, et cetera. So calling it a forum makes it more open, other people can join. And while I'm responsible for leading this group, every single initiative we start, I basically ask for volunteers, and if I don't, I kind of pick one. But every project we find a leader for that's going to own and be responsible for this, both because I can't do everything, I don't have all the time, but like I said, sharing leadership is really important to build up and skill up your whole organization. So that free jazz philosophy aside and kind of my journey to leadership covered, I want to talk about some specific techniques for how to share knowledge. So with me moving on these other roles and working less with the teams in Boston at Isotope, one of my colleagues pointed out sometime when I was away on holiday that, what should we do about making sure we have all the knowledge that Roth has when he's not here anymore? Maybe we should make a wiki page of Roth knowledge and record this. And I said, yeah, great idea, I think. I mean, I don't have time to write all this stuff on a wiki page, but if you want to start making this wiki page, go for it. But I mean, there's like a couple notes about how to run UBSAN or fix this other weird thing, but that was not the answer. So some techniques that do actually work. One thing I think is important to think about is how you approach answering questions. One thing that's important to me is answering them in public. Not always, like if someone asks a question, I don't want to embarrass people, give people the opportunity to feel uncomfortable or vulnerable. Actually, I heard someone say that they were glad that Claude Code, I can't see their Claude Code prompts because they were embarrassed by some of their questions they're asking. So that's another cool thing about AI. But sometimes when I get questions in a DM on Slack, I'll answer the question in the right public channel, not like calling this person out, but like sharing that knowledge publicly, because I don't want this to get lost in some DM. I want the whole team to read it. I want it to be searchable and find it in the future. And also another important thing in this remote work world where you can't just walk over to someone's desk is, when possible, have the discussions live. Because answering a question on Slack is one thing, but when you talk live with someone, you can get a little bit deeper, and you have the opportunity to ask them about other stuff that's going on with them and maybe find other opportunities for mentorship. And another part of this is when you have that live discussion, you can let other people join the party. So sometimes when somebody asks a question, hey, Roth, can you teach me about this piece of code here? Yeah, I'll say, oh, sure, we'll schedule a meeting about it. And then I'll broadcast to the relevant teams, hey, so-and-so and I are going to be discussing X. Anyone who wants to come, please just let me know and join this meet link, and you can hang out and watch us pair on this so you can learn about it as well. Another one, like I said before, is try not being the first one to answer. If someone comes something to you, just tell them, oh, here's who knows about this, and redirect them to the other person on the team that might know about this, and then they can come back to you if they're stuck. And then also, when you answer questions, don't just, tell them, this is the answer, this is why weird thing's happening with overload resolution. Actually provide them with a reference, either a talk, something on CPP reference, a blog post, something that you use to learn this thing, pass it on to the other person so that they don't just know your one-sentence answer, but they can actually learn about the topic kind of the same way you did. Another thing is talking through engineering problems and decisions. And one way I like to do this is the Socratic method, or asking people questions. When they come to me about something, asking them, any question I can about something. Oh, why is this a good idea? What if we do this? What problem might we have here? And so I much prefer to talk through and ask people about their thinking, and then maybe give my opinion at the end. But sometimes you just ask the questions, they come to the conclusion I might lead them to anyway. But one thing to watch out for this, your opinions as a leader carry a lot of weight. An early piece of feedback I have, and I think I have a review with my manager, and I think I might have a guess of which one or two conversations it was, but I got the feedback, Roth, someone was saying that they felt like you were shutting down their ideas, and when you were talking, planning some feature or something, and that's certainly not anything I'd want, and hopefully this talk shows you that I'm really trying to do the opposite. I try to think about examples where I might have done that, and I remembered one time on Glass, that UI library, I was talking to the developer about like a divider widget, putting a line between some objects. And should we do it this way, option A or option B? And they were thinking about option A. And I actually thought about option A also. But I didn't have confidence in option A. So I was kind of playing devil's advocate or kind of advocating for option B to like, basically I wanted them to convince me of the thing I was not so convinced of. But I think in my leadership position, this being their first job out of university, they thought I was challenging and telling them wrong, but I was really trying to push them to convince me that this was a good idea that I believed in as well. And maybe there's some other stories I could tell as well, but as a leader, your opinions carry a lot of weight, and so it's really important to let people know that which ideas of yours are strongly held or weakly held. Or is this just an idea, or amusing? Like, someone actually approached me for architecture plan they had, and they wanted my feedback on it. And I wasn't in that headspace. And so I had a lot of responses and feedback, but I made a point to tell them, hey, I don't know if any of this is right. This is just like what's coming off the top of my head, what I'm wondering, but like, I think you're on the right track. Also, in some other discussions recently, working with our test automation team, they asked me like, hey, Roth, we're thinking about approaching this new tooling this way. I think we could roll it out with the teams like this, or like this. What do you think we should do? And I told them, well, yeah, you listed all of the good options. I don't know, this is your project. Like, go talk with the teams, ask them what they need, but like, all the good options. You don't need me to decide. Please, pick your favorite of all the good options you listed. Another one that I really like is the 5 whys. If you've not heard about this is part of like, sometimes this comes up in discussion of lean software development, but comes from the Toyota manufacturing techniques. And it's about when you have a problem or something you want to solve, ask why 5 times. So the classic example is in the car factory, there's some oil on the floor. And so that's a problem, because someone could slip, hurt themselves. So the simple thing is, we just clean up the oil on the floor, job done. But if you ask the 5 whys, it's okay, why is there oil on the floor? Well, this machine is leaking oil. Well, why is that machine leaking oil? Oh, well, there's this thing that needs adjustment. Well, why is that out of adjustment? And asking this 5 whys gets you to the kind of the ideas that gets you to the core of the problem. This is also very useful when someone says, I want to do this project, or I have this idea for a solution for this. If you ask them the 5 whys about why we think we need to work on this, why is this important, et cetera, they might realize, maybe we don't need to do any of this work. But so I find this 5 whys activity a really useful thing when speaking with folks. Another thing is pair debugging, not just pair programming. So there's been a number of times where I've seen people learn debugging techniques from me or someone else, just seeing the other ways people approach stuff. I remember speaking about onboarding, we hired a developer who was doing embedded development on keyboards before working with us. And so a lot of his debugging was even weirder version of print debugging, which was make this LED do something if I get to this point. So he had not done a lot of IDE debugging. And so at some point, he ran into some trouble with something. And so we together looked at Xcode, and I was showing him like, you can use the breakpoint here. Like, here's how you watch memory. And he realized, wow, this is really cool. Like, I've never gotten this IDE developer experience. But if he had not done that pairing with me, he might have still just been in this embedded, printf mindset. And there's some other examples as well, like, when I was speaking yesterday about undefined behavior and rolling out the Clang sanitizers, but not all of our developers knew how to use those locally, or how to actually use the stack trace that comes out to fix the problem. So sometimes when I'm working on a problem like that, I'll actually just invite people to a call and say, hey, I'm working on this thing. You want to see how I'm enabling the sanitizers, and how I'm actually looking at this, how I find the right spot of the code, how I understand what the error is it's saying, and how we find the problem. And a particularly interesting one, enjoyable experience I had a couple of years ago with a developer. They were refactoring a very well-used piece of DSP at our company to move away from kind of an old API structure to a newer one. And the newer one didn't, out of the box, support sending audio or data to like meter or like show you visually what's happening with the audio. So they did all the DSP stuff, but had to figure this out. And somehow when they're trying to connect the meter to the UI, the meter data to the UI, like it was right at first, but somehow getting lost. And by the time everything was fully set up, the wrong stuff was connected, and they couldn't figure out why. And so, I joined them on a debugging session. And the first thing I do when people do this, I have them just, talk to me about what you know so far. And then they say, hey, will you show it to me in the debugger? And it's not that I don't believe you. It's just, but let's go through it together, because maybe we'll just get inspired seeing this together. So I have them go through their whole process. And then, okay, we have this data. And then we'll do it again, but now I'll be the navigator and tell them, okay, put a breakpoint here. Or, and then we'll check here, here, here. And then at some point, I was like, okay, we know like at some point this pointer is what we want it to be, and now it's pointing at something else later. So we can put a watch point and set that memory and keep track of what that is. And also we need to keep track of all these addresses. So maybe we'll set a variable in LLDB of what the current value is. And then we can keep track of that and remember these various pointer values. And that developer had never seen watch points before, or never had seen the ability to do, assign local variables or run expressions in LLDB. So they both get to see my thought process for debugging, which might be different from theirs, and we can all kind of share our experiences for this, and they might learn new techniques with the tools. And the most important part about this is, like a surgical theater where students are getting to watch the surgeon, do their thing. When we had this session, there was one developer working on this problem. But I put out a wide call and said, hey, if there's anyone else that wants to come and watch, you can sit in on this session. So it wasn't just one developer, but actually I think 3 or 4 people on the team learned these techniques from us all being together in the same room. Going to go through kind of some of this other stuff pretty quickly, because I do want to leave some time for discussion and questions. But code review is another big part about how you can teach people things, and also how you should show up as a leader. So one really important thing as a leader is being clear. Is this a nit? Like something like, oh, this would be better if you did it this way, but it's not a problem, like a style thing, or it's just something to think about. Because if you're not careful with that, people might think, oh, any comment coming from Roth is something you must deal with or fix. The other one is sometimes it's useful to leave comments just as education. Oh, there's nothing to fix here, but this is something that you should know about for the future, or you should think about how this part of the language works. And then there's things that are actual blockers or things that need to be fixed, like, oh, this is UB, or it's going to be really easy for someone to write a bug in the future. But if you're not clear which category you're in, coming from a senior leader, they might assume all of this is like, oh, I must do everything Roth says. And sometimes, no, I'm just trying to teach you stuff on the PR, and I'll let you know if it really is please fix. The other one is for yourself. You should be really afraid as a leader of the looks good to me PR. When your colleagues just approve everything, is that because your code is right and good, or is it because you wrote some complex template metaprogramming or tricky threading stuff, and no one on the team actually understands this, and they assume, oh, Ron's a smart guy, it's probably right. And on one of the second projects I worked on, there was a PR like that, and I felt like, I probably didn't really get the code review I needed. My one colleague was on holiday that maybe would have given me a hard time about it, and yeah, the threading stuff was not correct there. Also, when people ask you questions like, hey, Roth, can you help me understand this code on your PR? That will sometimes help you find bugs. I remember one thing I worked on our UI library, someone asked me to explain some function, and I started typing out the explanation of what it's doing, and then I realized, wait a minute, this isn't actually doing anything. It's doing a bunch of checks and blah, 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 and then returning null pointer at the end every time anyway, no matter what. So them asking me a question to explain my code made me realize, oh, no, it's not right. And the other one is if you make this really gnarly PR, whether it's threading stuff, template metaprogramming, something else complex that not everyone on your team might know about, when you open the PR, offer to give a teaching lesson or a workshop or a walkthrough first. Say, hey, I've got this complex topic. If you're not comfortable reviewing, let's have a call, and I can kind of explain this topic to you so you're armed with all the right information to do the review. So like I said, you want to be an expert with care. Because people can, if they take your information too seriously, they might work on stuff that maybe you're just giving some small advice. But also, you want them to be empowered to work on their own, not just rely on, oh, we have Roth's knowledge or so-and-so's knowledge, everything will be fine. So something I watch out for is whenever I see in Slack or a code review when someone asks, oh, why should I do this? And someone says, oh, it's because Roth said so. No. Just because I said so, that's not a good reason. No, you need to understand the reason why I suggest this, and I could be wrong. And actually, the reason I say because an RM said so, I had another colleague that we shared the same initials, which was hard with planning when our manager would put initials by things. But now that he's not at the company anymore, sometimes people say, "Oh, the other RM said so." I'm like, no, you can't just believe the words of people in the past. You need to understand this yourself. Because I've had this experience of arguing with ghosts. When I first joined Isotope, there were certain things in our code base where I said, like, oh, like, why are we doing this? And it's like, oh, yeah, because this guy said so that hasn't worked here for years and you've never met. And I'm like, well, okay. Or they said, like, oh, no, this isn't our bug. This is Apple's bug. I'm like, I don't really think so. But, like, how am I supposed to argue with the ghost when the people that are here today don't really understand why this ghost from the past said this? They just know, oh, this person I really trust said so. So it's really important that folks actually understand why you're giving a piece of advice so that when you go off somewhere else, you've left all this advice behind you and the teams actually understand why you're advocating for certain things. And like I said, it's really important, I think, as well, to brag about failure. So in this UI library that I led the design of, there's a couple weird things. And sometimes when people ask, like, oh, why is it like this? And I tell them, well, this is because I was coming from this from a perspective of like a hardcore Objective-C guy and Cocoa developer, and like, yeah, this was actually the wrong decision for C++ and how shared pointers are working. And so because I made this mistake, we have to do this other weird thing. And so, no, this is bad. And here's the mistakes I made. We could fix it this way in the future, maybe, but like, showing the stuff that you might have done wrong. And that will also help dispel the myth that you're some perfect, amazing staff or principal engineer. Also, encouraging teams to brag about their failure is important as well. When we were working on this Reverb product, NeoVerb, we were also developing internal performance test tooling. And we hadn't rolled it out like as a blocker in CI, but it was running in CI so we could look at it. And we were about to release our first patch to this product. And right before we mostly QA'd and we were about to ship it, and then one of the developers noticed in our CI logs that, oh, wait, the performance report is saying we regressed performance. And we looked at this and realized, oh, wait, no, we can't ship this update. And we had to fix the issue, ship the update. And after that, all the teams were like, oh, yes, now the performance tests are going to be blockers in CI because we don't want to miss this by accident again. But we didn't just keep this within the team. We actually encouraged the team to actually be loud and brag about the fact that, yeah, we made a mistake. We had to delay this patch a few days, fix this performance issue, but we learned something. Now we have this tool in place. And I think having teams be okay bragging about failure gives them the psychological safety that they don't need the protection of a tech lead or a manager to be the one that deals with the leadership, executives, marketing, PM, whoever might be disappointed about a delay or failure or mistake. If they're okay bragging about their failures, then I think they have more psychological safety to not need the shield of their leader. And that's why someone asked me on Q&A about my UB talk yesterday, about me publicly talking about our bugs. It's because I really believe in bragging about failure. So, do they still need me? One thing I think about, I'm trying to do a lot, is let go of being the one that can answer everyone's questions. And so my technique for approaching Slack, when I see questions asked in a public channel, they're like, oh, I know this. I don't type the answer. I put a reminder for 3 hours, tomorrow, Monday, to check back on this thread. Or maybe I'll just say, like, oh, get notified by responses. And I'll wait and try to give the opportunity for someone else on the team to respond. And only if everyone's completely stuck, then yeah, I might chime in later. But I really try to never be the first responder these days to people's questions. The other one is emotionally letting go. So I mentioned Ozone, this mastering software that I'm very proud of the release I worked on for this. And NeoVerb, one of the only products I worked on that was a 1.0 launch. It was very fun. It's a very cool creative product. Was very pleased that in our Sound on Sound review, which is a trade magazine, when we launched NeoVerb, it was the only product I worked on where the cons in the review was no obvious cons. So these things mean a lot to me. They're my babies. But now, I'm not on the teams that work on them. Some of the engineers that work on them are different ones that did not work with me on them at the time. There's new product managers. They have different ideas, different visions for this. And Sometimes they're taking my baby in product directions that I don't necessarily agree with, maybe, or technical directions. And I might, in a one-on-one conversation, share some thoughts on like, oh, hey, have you thought about this, etc. But these are not mine anymore. They're now the teams that own them. And so, I need to be really careful about how I share my opinions with others on this. So what about AI? Could this also help you become obsolete as a leader? A number of years ago, again, talking about this UI library, we have a Slack channel dedicated to it, and I thought, there's probably a lot of really valuable Q&A and documentation in this Slack channel. And I thought, could I somehow pull this all out and turn this into a FAQ? So I had IT give me a data dump of all the information from that Slack channel, and I thought I was going to write some script, look for anywhere where there's a question mark from someone else and an answer from Roth nearby, and turn that into Q&A. I never figured out how to write that script, but now we have some pretty cool AI friends, and so with MCP servers, you can connect a lot of AIs to Slack, and they can just maybe search and read the information themselves. Or maybe we could even train a Roth chatbot to load all the data from Slack, do a RAG training, make a RAG where they have access to all of the Roth answers, and we have the Roth chatbot. Unexplored ideas, but I've been musing about this in the back of my mind, so I just wanted to end with mentioning this. So in conclusion, remember, lead by example, be vulnerable and open, practice candor, brag about your failures. One-on-one mentorship is important, but also, invite groups to the discussion as well. Thank you very much. And I think we have a few minutes, so I offer you to ask any questions you may have. But also, as I said, this is something I'm figuring out myself. So I also encourage you to not just ask questions, but if there's want to join the discussion or share anything, please do.
Then I'll start. How do you handle people on the team who are very smart and knowledgeable technically, but who have, let's say, little compassion for mere mortals and trying to understand what they are doing and why they are doing it?
That is a good question. Luckily, I do work with a lot of very humble people, so I don't run into this too often, but I do see this show up. I think there's probably two pieces of it. One is for the mere mortal, to coach them and talk with them, to remind them that we're all just humans, and maybe this person has more experience, they've read this bit of the standard, etc. But if you have ideas, feel confident for them. For the expert, again, I would encourage them to ask the whys. Why is someone doing something? Because I sometimes run into this as well, where someone's proposing a project, and I'm like, this sounds like a bad idea. Why would we do this? But I do not say that at first. I ask the 5 whys to try to understand why. And sometimes we come to the conclusion, oh, this isn't actually worth doing. But other times, I actually realize, oh, I didn't realize this is what is important. So that's what comes to mind off the top of my head. Let's chat more in the hallway about it, because I think that's a delicate issue I've not thought a ton about. But yeah, it is tricky when you have these experts that just want to tell you the way it is. I think also, maybe if you're in the call sometimes, even just bringing up that, oh, there might be another piece of information that this person isn't considering, and that might also get that expert to change their mind. I'm thinking about, someone we're talking about some Mac OS stuff and what you're allowed to do on certain versions with, the way Xcode works with Apple's installed libc++. And they said, oh, no, we can't use these C++20 features for this reason. Then I point out, oh, actually, we're already doing it in the code base over here. And so sometimes that data just shows that they're actually having real code that does something different also sometimes can show that expert that there's other ways of doing things that might work. But I wish I had a better answer for that. Yes, please.
Question from the online audience. You mentioned presenting PR when it contains complex code like template metaprogramming, multi-threading, etc. How do you manage to do so efficiently without causing a lot of biases to the reviewers? As a context, I ban such practice at work as it often leads to false feeling of understanding.
Well, as far as the slowdown aspect, I mean, this is actually something we're discussing a lot internally with some teams right now, is like how to get PRs merged faster, because some are sitting around for a while. I do think like fast feedback and like integrating changes quickly is important. But part of my philosophy with code review is I think as a reviewer, you should read and understand every line of code that you're reviewing. And if you don't understand it, you should be asking a question. So my personal philosophy is, if there are people on your team that are not equipped to understand every line of code of that, it's not a waste. It's just not a slowdown. It's actually like the only way you can like maintain the healthier code base, and you should do it to teach them these things. On the question of false understanding, yeah, that's a bit of a tricky one. Part of it is, again, as you explain stuff, asking that person to explain back to you is one thing. Another one is actually also asking them to write some other new code. So there was something I was working on where I did some code review with someone, and I realized, like, I was pointing out, like, oh no, I was reviewing their code, and it's kind of reverse of them reviewing my code, but a similar teaching example is they were doing some stuff that needed some tricky stuff with atomics, and so we had a pairing session where we wrote something. There's kind of two places in the code they need to work on this, and we wrote one part of it together. I explained, how the release acquire stuff works. I pointed them to Herb Sutter's atomic weapons talk, said, hey, I suggest you watch this video, and then they wrote the other part on their own, and then I could actually see that they actually, were able to use these concepts. So I think, yeah, the two things that come to mind, again, these are all tricky challenges and might not always get right in the first place, but avoiding the false understanding, again, I think is, having people explain back to you what they think they've learned, and actually like encouraging them to like write some even though reviewing your PR, maybe write some example code or something that really shows, like, that gets them some hands-on practice with that. But that is something I worry about sometimes when I'm teaching something in that they don't get it. But the other thing I encourage people when I'm doing those, let's talk about and teach you about this tricky thing in my PR, I really, really emphasize, please, 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 don't click the approve button until you understand it. If you really feel confident you understand it, click the approve button. If you don't, please come back to me with more questions.
All right, thank you. We are already out of time, so maybe just one quick last question.
Yep.
Well, it's problematic because I have two. I'll try my luck. So first, thank you for a very inspirational talk. So my first question is, how would you handle being tech lead on a team where you're the C++ expert, but you're not an expert on the subject matter of the team? And second question, how would you handle the trade-off between the business need of quick code reviews versus wanting to use those code reviews as a learning opportunity for the developers?
Okay, can you remind me the first question quickly? Because I started already thinking about the answer to the second. Let me answer the second one, and then please remind me of the first one. So about the quick code review thing, there's two aspects to it, I think. There's when I'm reviewing somebody else's code, I even will actually reach out to people directly and point out to them that, like, hey, just so you know, these comments here, here, and here, I'm trying to teach you something, but I don't think you need to change your code. Like, please don't like block on any of this. Like, this is discussion and commentary. So I actually am just very vocal about, like, when my commentary is a blocker or not. Actually, this came up recently. Now that we're starting to use AI tools, writing instructions files. Someone made a PR for some instructions files. I had a lot of questions and feedback, but I told them, hey, none of this is a blocker. Like, none of us here know what we're talking about. These are just my questions. So that's one thing. And then, and the other thing is also kind of, whether it's maybe, and another thing that isn't about code review, I'll mention an example, is talking with managers about how, like, slowing down to learn things will make us faster later. So the example I'll give is there was a couple of years ago, I was working with a team on a story slicing technique of mine I call quantum value slicing. Maybe I'll give a talk on that someday. But I ran into some issue where, like, leadership teams were like, hey, Roth, we're wasting so much time and refinement with the teams. We really got to get going. And so I met with them, and I explained what I was trying to do. I said, look, I've got this experiment. I really think if we do this knowledge building, I know it feels like we're going slow now, but it will go faster later. Please give me the time box to do this, and try to advocate for slowing down to learn will speed up the teams overall and create that business value. And what was the first question?
About being a tech lead on a team where you're, in my case, C++ expert, but not a subject matter expert in what the team actually does beyond C++, of course.
Yeah, so there's a few pieces to this. One, try to be comfortable with that. So this staff engineer I mentioned that kind of has kind of taken over my lead of kind of keeping an eye on things in Boston and the isotope team. They've worked at multimedia stuff for a while, but they're not a DSP expert. So when they're working on DSP features, they just are open and ask for questions and ask for help from the other people on the team. And yeah, I think it's just know your subject matter experts and ask for help. And even myself, who has DSP background, I'm not the best DSP engineer, so I'm a subject matter expert. I know about C++, but there's things like, without getting the details, with like Fourier transforms and whether you have like this number of bins, is it like n over 2 or n over 2 plus 1 and when and why? I get mixed up about that every time. And so just, again, I think it's being, advocating for the knowledge you know and just being vulnerable and being very clear about what you don't know and knowing who on the team you can rely on to help you with what you need. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to my music and stories.